Developing a strict hierarchy among fully fledged sisters, the Amerlin seat held the highest place, followed by those in positions of prominence, like the Keeper of the Chronicles, acting as an assistant and advisor to their leader, as well as the Mistress of Novices, responsible for overseeing novice training and punishing those who broke their rules. Then there were the Sitters, 3 women from each Aja, who sat on the ruling council called the Hall of the Tower, voting on important issues and policies, including the election of the Amerlin seat. There were also the Aja heads, each of whom led their faction, following individual customs and traditions, which differed greatly between the Ajas. Aside from these women in positions of authority, Aes Sedai were ranked firstly by their level of power, and then by age, with less skilled and younger channelers expected to defer to the more powerful and older sisters among them. Though most of the powerful channelers in the Westlands either killed themselves or ended up in the White Tower for training, some few escaped notice from the Aes Sedai long enough to become Wilders, surviving the initial dangers on their own while learning some measure of self-control. As for those less powerful channelers who were not discovered by the Tower, or else went for training but failed to become full Aes Sedai, they sometimes formed independent groups, like the Daughters of Silence or Kinswomen. Yet Tarvalin would not allow a rival order of magic users to form in the Westlands, and so either destroyed these organizations or used them to serve their own interests. Though the Aes Sedai of Tarvalin wielded great influence in the Westlands, acting as a powerful realm while also providing advisors, diplomats, and occasionally warriors to surrounding nations, many of their most impressive talents from the Age of Legends were lost over time, including the ability to travel instantly from one place to another, fly through the air, freely enter the world of dreams, and the creation of Angreal, sa'angreal, and ter'angreal. Nevertheless, they continued to be a formidable organization capable of extraordinary feats, including their capacity to capture and kill or gentle male channelers of the One Power, especially those who raised armies by falsely declaring themselves the Dragon Reborn. While not every false dragon was capable of wielding saidin, there were those who did, such as Rowland Darkspane, Urian Stonebow, Davian, Guerra Malasan, and Logain, some of whose followers launched failed attacks against Tarvalin itself in order to rescue their captured leaders. Despite claiming to serve humanity and do what was best for the nations of the Westlands, Aes Sedai gained a reputation for deception and self-interest, as they found ways around the First Oath to give false information, and often did what was best for themselves or the White Tower. One of the most heinous examples of an Aes Sedai abuse of power came during the Trolloc Wars, fought 1,000 years after breaking, when Tetsuan of the Red Aja was raised to Amerlin's seat. A time of great turmoil, many nations fell to the Shadow Spawn under their leader Ba'al-Zaman, who created the secretive, Dark One-worshipping Black Aja to infiltrate the White Tower, and raised Dreadlord channelers to lead his armies in an invasion of the South. Yet one of the most tragic tales of this era emerged from the fall of Manetheren, ruled by the noble King Aemon, who left his own realm vulnerable because he sent troops to help neighboring powers. When the war at last reached his kingdom, he sent word to his allies and the White Tower for aid, yet the Amerlin seat was a longtime rival and enemy of King Aemon's Aes Sedai wife, Queen Eldrine, and so out of personal spite, delayed and prevented help from reaching Manetheren. As a result, King Aemon died fighting a courageous last stand against the Trolloc invaders, which then caused his wife to go mad with grief, destroying herself, the enemy army, and their own capital city in a massive explosion of Saidar energy. When the other Aes Sedai learned what their leader did, they deposed Tetsuan and severed her connection to the One Power through a method called stilling, leaving her a miserable wretch, condemned to serve as a scullery maid until she died 3 years later. The first Amerlin seat to be stilled, she became a lesson to all Aes Sedai that no one was above Tower law. While the Trolloc Wars devastated much of the continent, including Tarvalin, which suffered heavy losses during an attack against the city itself in 1290 AB, the nations of the West at last won the critical Battle of Mergande in 1301 AB, with a new Amerlin seat, Rashima Karen Mosa, killed in the fighting, taking out 9 Dreadlords before falling. A few centuries later, the Aes Sedai once again demonstrated their resolve by deposing Queen Sulmara of Maseneshar to make her a servant in the White Tower. Though some claim she was an Aes Sedai who became queen of her homeland without permission, others say she was simply a ruler who needed a lesson in humility. After defeating Guerra Malasan in 943 FY during the War of the Second Dragon, the legendary king Arthur Hawkwing parted on bad terms with the Amarlin Seat, Bonwyn Maragden, despite him saving Tar Valon from an attack of 100,000 men trying to free the false dragon. Seeking his utter ruin, the Amarlin Seat abused her power by encouraging other nations to attack Hawkwing's homeland of Shandale. Yet the man was such an incredible warrior and general, he defeated every invasion, proving so successful his counterattacks allowed him to conquer and unite all of the Westlands save Tar Valon. Despite his animosity with the Amarlin Seat, Hawkwing did not know with certainty the full measure of her conspiracy against him, and so allowed Aes Sedai to join his government, serving in positions of authority. However, everything changed when his advisor, Jalwyn Morad, convinced him to turn against the Aes Sedai, expelling them from his court and laying siege to Tar Valon. When the Sisters of the White Tower discovered the crimes of the Amarlin Seat, she was deposed, stilled, and left a servant until dying 4 years later. But this was not enough to appease Arthur Hawkwing, and so the siege continued. In 994 FY, a year after suffering a terrible fire in the library of the White Tower, Arthur Hawkwing died and his empire collapsed into the War of the 100 Years, which meant an end to the siege against Tar Valon while would-be rulers fought to carve out their own independent territories. When the war at last ended, 24 nations and 3 independent city-states took the place of the former empire, each of which developed their own attitude and relationship with the White Tower of Tar Valon. Becoming allies to the White Tower, Aes Sedai served as advisors to Andor and Cairhien, though their ties were considerably closer to the ruling queens of Andor, establishing a tradition where the female heir studied in the White Tower before inheriting the throne. Oppositely, the nation of Amadisia, home to the Children of the Light, an independent military organization dedicated to fighting the Dark One, hated the Aes Sedai of Tar Valon, as they associated the use of the One Power with the Shadow. A weak ruler on the throne, the Children of the Light were the true power in Amadisia, making it the only nation where Aes Sedai and channeling were entirely outlawed. In the year 306 of the New Era, the Children even managed to kill the Amarlin Seat, Serenia Latar, before hanging her dead body for all to see. In other regions, like the northern borderlands, Aes Sedai were honored and respected, while the southern realms like Tyr barely tolerated their presence. In 601 NE, the Amarlin Seat, Xian Chunla, was deposed and exiled due to extreme opposition from the Hall of the Tower, and was assassinated 50 years later when the Aes Sedai learned of a plot seeking to restore her power. In 794 NE, the independent channeling organization, the Daughters of Silence, was founded, but only a few years later in 798 was discovered and destroyed, with their women absorbed into the tower, where only one among them proved capable of becoming a full sister. In 890 NE, the powerful Aes Sedai, Cadsuane Malydrin, fled from the White Tower, entering into a decade of self-imposed exile to avoid being elected as Amarlin Seat. During the Aiel War from 976 to 978 NE, the nations of the Westlands gathered at Tar Valon to fight a final battle against the Aiel invaders of the East, who sought to kill King Lamin Damodred of Cairhien. When the king was dead, the Aiel withdrew, thereby making it seem like the West was victorious. Yet in spite of this tumultuous battle and the death of a king, a far more momentous event occurred nearby in the White Tower when the Keeper of the Chronicles, Gitara Moroso, had a sudden vision proclaiming the dragon was reborn before dying from the shock of this revelation. The only witnesses were the Amarlin Seat, Tamra Ospenya, and the accepted Moiraine Damodred and Swain Sanche, who were sworn to secrecy. 2 decades later, in 997 NE, with Swain Sanche serving as Amarlin Seat, Moiraine Damodred set out to the Two Rivers region of Andor, seeking the Dragon Reborn. By the year 997 NE, the power of Tar Valon was drastically reduced, with only about 1,000 Aes Sedai serving the White Tower. Nevertheless, they played a crucial role in the rise of the Dragon Reborn, suffering much hardship during these years, as they were infiltrated and sabotaged by the Black Aja, leading to rebellion and civil war among the sisters. Though there were 2 competing Amarlin Seats for a time, they eventually reunified under the rebel Amarlin Egwene Alvir, who enacted a more aggressive recruitment policy, testing any woman who wished it, thereby greatly bolstering their numbers. United under this young, powerful Amarlin Seat, the White Tower fought with the armies of the Dragon Reborn in the final battle of Tarmon Gai'don, contributing greatly to their final victory and salvation of the world. Love The Wheel of Time or any other series? Then why not check out Audible, where they have the largest collection of audiobooks available. Sign up through the links below for regular membership and get a 30-day free trial, or else try Premium Plus for a 60-day trial and up to 3 free audiobooks. For those who prefer to read their stories, there is the Kindle Unlimited plan, where you get as many ebooks as you wish. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, along with the prequel novel and history book. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Sir Rick Lone, Delacruz the Freed, Sir Xavier, Defender of the Flame, and Kyle Blitzsword. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.